I wanted to let a little sunlight in, wake you up. Okay? This is going to be interactive, I hope. All right? Good. So when they asked me to talk about early company culture, that was interesting because I started a company 2.5 years ago after 20 years at Microsoft. Okay? But I think culture is important in any size company. But you have a unique opportunity to establish the culture early in the startup's life cycle. Okay? So what I'm going to talk about really applies to any company. But how do you get started? That's the key, right? So what is culture? For most people, it's this nebulous thing, right? Nobody's able to, you put your finger here and it moves over there, another finger over there. What is culture? Well, the classical definition of culture is that it's a set of shared beliefs, right? And sometimes beliefs are true, sometimes they're not. But belief over time that is validated by data and truth becomes knowledge. You have to have a set of beliefs to start with. It's a set of shared values. It's the ability of the organization to decide between what's right and what's wrong. Okay? And it's a set of shared practices. You know, how you do your day-to-day stuff. That's the classical definition. A set of shared beliefs, values, and practices. I have a different definition. And a lot of my analogies are going to come from sports. Okay? For me, culture is like training. Now, for about 7 years, I spent, from the time I was 13 to the time I was 20, I used to play lots and lots and lots of cricket. I was touring all the time. I had 30% attendance in college because I was touring. So I was immersed in the cricket culture in the 1980s. And that was the time, if you remember, some of you are not old enough here, India won the first World Cup. So it was actually a world-class culture, right? I think of culture as the training that you do in an organization that determines how you react in times of stress. It's kind of like sport. You train, you train, you train, and then in a match, which is 1% of the total time, you react almost instinctively. That is culture. Okay? It's what happens before you have to make a decision. That's culture. It's what happens, before a crisis. That's culture. It's what happens when every day you make these decisions in different parts of the organization, and those decisions are made because of culture. Okay? So I believe that culture is something that you train an organization every day. It isn't something that you write up and leave it on, a PowerPoint deck. Every day is culture. Now, every company that we know of has a culture. IBM has a culture, Microsoft has a culture, Facebook has an engineering culture, right? eBay has a culture. Every team has a culture, right? It doesn't have to be 20,000 people to have a culture. I mean, Manchester United has a culture. They never give up, except last year, right? And Liverpool has a culture. The Indian team has a culture. It's different from the culture from the 1980s. Okay? Every organization, every group has a culture. The Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, Rotary Club, they all have a culture, right? You put 3 people together and they have a culture, right? Your friends, your closest group of friends has a culture, right? So my point is, everything's going to have a culture. Why not get it right? Why not think about it? Why not do the right thing? I was fortunate to attend the 2012 Olympics, and I was sitting, right at the front for the Jamaican relay team. What an exciting culture. They were relaxed, they were, doing this, doing that. They had fun. You could see the culture difference between them and the Russians and the Americans, right? And why was that? Because they were world class. Did the culture result in them winning, or the winning result in the culture? It's both. But they had a culture, and it was different. Okay? So how do you get a winning culture? You have to ask yourself, because if you have a winning culture, or winning creates a culture, you just so much better. Okay, why is this thing important? I think everybody understands it's important in some way, but really why? And you know, I've built several organizations at Microsoft from scratch. Several of them have become $1 billion, in revenue. In the process of building a new company, we started at 0 3 years ago. We're about 65 people now. Why do you do culture? Well, culture is to an organization as marketing is to a product. It's the reason people come to work for you. You don't know this, but people come to work for you because of the culture of the organization. They leave because of the culture of the organization. Culture is to an organization what marketing is to a product. It's what attracts people to your company. That's why you should do it. It makes hiring easier, it makes retention easier, it makes people more productive. Culture is what helps people be most creative and realize their potential. They do their best work when the culture allows them to do their best work. Culture allows you to scale faster. Look, when you're a startup and there's 5 of you, you probably hired your best friends or people you know. Your culture is very consistent. But when you scale, if you don't have that initial set of consistent shared values, beliefs, values, and practices, you don't scale. You can't scale. So the reason to do culture is because you can scale faster. The reason to do culture is you can move faster. I can't be part of every decision. At 60 people, I cannot participate in every decision. But if there's a shared value system, people know what's right and what's wrong, move faster. Okay? There's so many good reasons to have a great culture. Culture, in startups at least, and that's true for companies as well, large companies, is defined by leader. And I'm not just talking about the single person, I'm talking about the early group and an early set of people. I worked at Microsoft very early. I started in 1990. Very different culture than in the 2000s. And in the last year, you can see the culture has changed because of Satya, right? Embraced open source. That's a value judgment, right? Right. It's very. So leaders define culture. Don't underestimate that. And I'm not talking about just the one person. It's the initial set of people. And so it's really important that that group understand what the shared beliefs, values, and practices are. Now, obviously, my current company and my last efforts at Microsoft really were shaped by my values, my beliefs, and my judgment and my practices, right? And so, where did I get my culture? I got my culture. I was born here. I was raised here. I spent the first 21 years in Madras. Some of that kind of seeped into me. But really, the defining moments were, my cricket career. What I learned was being world class. What I learned was never giving up. I don't think we ever lost a match in the team that I played for. This was L. Sivaramakrishnan, W.E. Raman, K. Srikant. 10 of them have played for India. When you're 13, that matters. It shaped my life. That's a picture actually of the South Zone under 15 team taken in Chinnaswamy Stadium. And the background is Chetak. I used to play for MCC in the First Division League. Those are my homes. Now, another thing that shaped my culture, I was fortunate enough to go to MIT after that. That was a culture of ideas. I spent extraordinary amounts of time in a lab by myself inventing stuff. This was really when I realized the power of ideas, the power of thinking big, the power of community. My culture was shaped by Microsoft. Think big, pay attention to the details, take action. And I'm talking about the 1990s culture. Okay? And so I've tried to model the culture at Indix based on my experiences, because one of the most important things about culture is you have to be authentic. If your culture is not authentic, if it doesn't reflect the beliefs, values, and practices of the people in the company, it's fake. It doesn't work. So the culture of my company is my culture. Don't fake it. The first document I wrote before we started Indix is this document. It's on the website. You know, after 19 years at Microsoft, I realized I wanted to work with people I loved to work with on things that I cared about, things that were interesting. This is the first document I wrote. You can think of it as a shared vision, a shared set of values. This is the culture document. Okay? Over time, we refined it. This is a little complicated. It takes you about 10 minutes to read. Okay? And there's a lot of depth in there. I borrowed from Google, I borrowed from Facebook, I borrowed from Microsoft, I borrowed from my life experiences. But we've now boiled it down to a few things. Our culture, the foundation of our culture is transparency. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. Another pillar of our culture is trust. We're in 5 different cities already. Chennai, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, and in New Jersey. How do you work if you don't trust each other? Another pillar of our culture is support. We support each other. We don't have policies that say you can only take 14 days of vacation. We trust you to take the right amount of vacation. Okay? We don't have expense policies. We trust you to make the right decisions. Okay? I share everything about the company with people. We trust you not to forward confidential information. You make a decision and it's a mistake, that's okay. We trust you, we support you in failing. But we also push you hard. We push you to challenge yourself. Okay? Support and challenge have to go hand in hand. And we like to have a little bit of fun. Okay? If you don't have this, if you don't want to spend this much time with the people, and it's not fun, you're not going to have a great culture. So those are the pillars right now of Indix. So let me tell you a little bit about how to practice what you preach. I talked about transparency. You can't just put it on a slide and let it go. You've got to make it happen every day. Remember that? It's the training, it's the practice. Let me talk about transparency. What can you do every day, every week, every month, every year? Simple things. I share the financial situation of the company every month. Everybody knows how much money is in the bank. Everybody knows how much sales we did. Everybody knows which salesperson is performing. Everybody knows who missed the deadline. Transparency. Another example. Every month we do anonymous surveys. People can talk about whatever they want. You can't make it personal because that's part of our culture. Okay? But if there's a problem that needs to be fixed, you can tell us anonymously. Because in some locations, anonymous works. We don't just leave it to anonymous. Every Wednesday we get together on the floor and we do this thing called fishbowl. You have 4 chairs. You can take a seat and talk about anything you want. Anything. You can talk about the bathrooms. You can talk about engineering culture. You can talk about what an asshole Sanjay is. Anything. You just have to be seated in the chair. Okay? And that is interesting because in that environment, when you propose a problem, you also come up with solutions. People take ownership. Okay? We've even gone so far as to consider having the same salary for everybody because we want to be completely transparent. We decided not to do it. We're not ready. We're not ready. It doesn't mean that the world isn't ready. We're just not ready. Okay? So these are things you can do every day. Let me talk about support, which is one of the pillars. Last year, my dad went through cancer, lung cancer. He passed away. You know, I was traveling around the world trying to be with him. I didn't ask people to support me, but they did. Right? Everybody stepped up. It's not a requirement. People just do it. So I will leave you with my obligatory Star Wars slide and t-shirt. Everything you ever wanted to know about life or running a company is in Star Wars. Everything you ever wanted to know about running a company, you learn by playing sport. Okay? So there is so much good stuff out there. Built on the shoulders of giants. The most fascinating presentation I've read in the last couple of years is the Culture Code by Hubspot. Check it out. It's 130 slides. Wonderful, amazing, just beautiful, well articulated about the need for culture and what the culture should be. They got their learning from Netflix. There's a great presentation about Netflix and how they think about culture. There's great documents on Facebook culture, Etsy culture, lots and lots of stuff, built on the shoulders of giants. And the most important advice I have for you, do or do not. There is no try. One of my guys asked me, what is culture? How do I do this? I said, it's the way you behave. That is culture. Do or do not. There is no try. If you don't do it, the downsides are just too horrible to think about. That's it. Questions? Concerns? Yeah, wait for the mic. There's. You can be loud enough? Okay.
Okay. Sanjay, firstly, lovely teacher. So you talked about the fish bowl, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't it bring about a sense of negativity if somebody that says Sanjay is an asshole?
They haven't said that yet. But here's the thing, right? When you try, and you know, and you're trying different things, so negativity does come out in the anonymous stuff, right? And you have to address it. And so we actually publish all the negative stuff, right? So when the anonymous comments come in, we actually share the whole thing. Everybody shares it. And so the guys in the US are like, wow, this thing is in trouble, right? I'm like, no, this is what, this is what they feel. We can fix it. I'd rather know what they're thinking about than not. Okay, the fishbowl tends to be very, very positive because they're talking about, you know, problems everybody's facing, because it's not just my problem, it's our problem. You end up with solutions. Somebody takes ownership. One of the biggest things about problems in companies is ownership. If management says you own it, it never happens.
Exactly, because we always go about saying, please tell us anything that is there on your head, on your mind,
Yep.
and kind of never comes.
It never happens.
But then this is like that. It's like a sanctuary wherein anything can be said and nothing will be taken.
Group therapy is what fishbowl is. Group therapy. But that without the anonymous stuff doesn't work. You need both. And you need the leadership to say, hey, look, what do you care about? What do you want? What are you thinking about? I spend an inordinate amount of time talking to people. We have mentorship, programs, which is a different level of, how can we help you with your career? How can you, help improve your skills? So it's a bunch of things. Yeah, we'll come to you.
All right, so, you talked about transparency, that's great, but, in a startup culture,
Yeah.
a lot of times, you have people with different levels of maturity. I mean, is that a safe thing to do? I mean, will everyone understand the level of transparency that you're talking about?
Well, so far, yes. I think you trust people. I think they are at different levels of understanding, but I have not had a single piece of confidential mail, forwarded on. Right? I trust that they haven't done it, but we haven't seen the consequences of it. It's just one of those. Let me tell you a little bit about transparency and what we did at Microsoft. The Department of Justice case, if you remember that, again, some of us do, 1999, 2001. I was tasked with starting the developer division, .NET, at that time. One of the first things we wanted to do was to say, hey, look, we're real human beings at Microsoft. We think like you, we eat like you, we do stuff that you do. We thought about transparency, and we created this environment called Channel 9. Channel 9 is, you're on an airplane, and you can tune into Channel 9. You can see what the communications are between the pilot and air traffic control. Complete transparency. There's a guy called Robert Scoble who was on my team who'd go into people's offices and just interview them. He'd pop into Bill's office and say, hey, what are you working on today, Bill? That kind of transparency transformed the way the developer community thought about Microsoft. There might be a few downsides to transparency, like maturity, but the upsides.
But at Indix, did you spend a lot of time coaching
No.
your people? No.
No. People respect it. People respect transparency. They don't take advantage of it. Someday somebody will, you know what, we'll deal with it then. Right? Yeah.
So actually, you wanted to set a culture, okay, and maybe 99% of your people are following, and there are some people, maybe 1%, and I hope that also affect the entire thing. So how do we deal with that?
I mean, look, if 99% of the people, you know, have a shared value of beliefs, you know, values and practices, that 1% is okay.
Okay.
I mean, most companies, it's 60-40 or 80-20. You know, 1% is fine. And you know what? Interestingly enough, the system deals with that.
Okay.
The system deals with that.
Because what we mean by 1% is because if we have a team of 10 and one is not following, in that case, like.
Yeah, it comes out and people get feedback politely.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, they fix it or they go find somewhere that the culture is more aligned to them. And that's a good thing. Because you can't impose it. You can't be a dictator about culture.
Exactly.
You shouldn't be a dictator about culture. In fact, you want your culture to evolve as well. We will add more pillars to our culture, right? This set of 4 or 5 pillars is right for right now. But there will be more, so you have to change culture over time as well.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. In the interest of time, again, we'll cut down the Q&A. Thanks, that was a great session, Sanjay. Thank you so much again.